recently a movie was made about a project I was involved in, and a famous actor played me in the movie. So,
I mean, it does sound like you basically fought for, no, I mean, not in a combative way, but really pushed for where you've ended up. Like, how
I'm gonna jump in and correct you. I was very combative.
I was trying to be nice, but yeah.
You know, Fernando Alonso says it best. He was asked after his second world championship by a journalist, "What's it like to be the best racing driver in the world?" And he said, "I'm not the best racing driver in the world. There's a guy driving a bus in Mexico who he just doesn't know it yet." And basically, we were trying to find the Mexican bus driver, right, that had that talent. And of course, there's a private jet that I fly around on in the movie, and I just remember it being a lot more easy jet than private jet. And then on the Thursday, it was this. You know, I got a phone call from Andrew van der Berg saying, "This race ain't happening because of this thing called COVID," which we didn't really know much about at that time, of course.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Georgie's Stripping the Dipping podcast. I'm your host, F1 Blag, and today we've got a guy that spans all sorts of motorsport related industries. So he is the founder and CEO of DCC & Co, of Esports and Cars, and the creator of GT Academy, which, if you didn't know, has been made into a film. So without further ado, Darren Cox, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Lovely to have you. The first question we always ask our guests is, imagine you're meeting our listeners for the first time. I mean, I guess you are. Like, how would you introduce yourself to them?
This isn't going to be a short answer, as you'll probably find out, depending on how long we go on. Some of my answers aren't short. The reason being is I've learnt about introducing myself in a different culture. I recently went to the Miami Grand Prix, which was very enjoyable, and I was there as an ambassador for a group of people who had me there to tell stories, much the same as you guys are now. And being a reserved English guy, I introduced myself. "Hello, I'm Darren." And of course, the Americans are a bit more forthright than us reserved Brits, aren't they? And they would tell you their name, where they're from, what their job is, and almost their net worth, but not quite. You feel it was only two more sentences away. So my American host was saying, "Okay, Darren, but tell them what you've done." But by the end of it, I sort of got to a point where I shortcut that story and came out with the story that we're about to tell around the fact that recently a movie was made about a project I was involved in, and a famous actor played me in the movie. So yeah, normally I would slowly explain my story, but having been in America recently, I find that maybe getting straight to the point's a lot more obvious. But I also tell people, as a joke, that one of the least known things about me is that I won the Silverstone 24 Hours as a driver.
Ooh.
A lot of people, especially those that know my talent behind the wheel rather than the other side of the pit wall.
Was that the thing that, the Top Gear guys did, and then, everyone hated them because they were experienced drivers? Is that thing? Like, obviously it was probably a different year, but...
Yes, yeah, no, that was well before I did it. I did it in, I won the Silverstone 24 Hours in 2016. But yes, for me, that was probably my favorite ever Top Gear episode, because I think it actually showed them it wasn't scripted, that the accident really did happen that Hammond had, and Jeremy, I think, really did actually shed a tear at the end of the race because of, if you haven't seen it, what the emotions they went through. And that's 24-hour racing. But I guess that's not what we're here to talk about.
No, but it is fascinating. And we have had some endurance racers and some strategists from sort of GT endurance series on the show. So let's go back, obviously long before young Darren went to Miami and learnt to be forthright. What's your earliest motorsport memory?
Probably my dad winning coming third in the British Championships, a short oval track. It was no longer there, called Wimbledon, in a Mini, in 1980. That was. My brother was in a pushchair. He was under 1 year old, so I was 5, and that was my first motorsport memory. And basically grew up around Dad scraping around trying to race cars, as well as doing some very interesting thing in his professional life. So yeah, that was the first one, and many memories as a kid growing up that basically made me into the person I am today, and the passion for the sport that I've got right now.
I mean, that's incredible, and let's get into sort of how that inspired your career. But Wimbledon short oval, is that code for like Wimbledon dogs, or was that like on a different track? Because I know that Wimbledon used to
Yeah,
have
no,
a greyhound track.
yeah, yeah, no, yeah. It was the greyhound track was around the outside of the
Ah,
yeah. So hot rods were there, and bangers and stock cars. So yeah, I mean, there's probably from a European's point of view, there's a lot more focus on short dirt ovals in America because that's the route to NASCAR. But in this country, we've had ovals, not the big ones, apart from Rockingham, that you'd have in the US, like Daytona or Indianapolis. But yeah, there's been a history from many years of short track ovals, and that was one of them. But you're right, normally they shared their space with greyhound tracks back in the day.
that makes a lot of sense. And I don't see too many of them around these days. I remember, we hear about Rye House as one of the tracks that Lewis Hamilton perhaps started, in go-karts. But there is, I don't know if it's still there, before you get to the track, a short oval, so interesting. I think it's called Essex. Right. No, maybe it isn't Essex, it's a different one. But yeah, is it?
No, Essex Arena was somewhere else.
There you go.
I could name a few. Brayfield into Northampton International
Very good.
Raceway, which we used to call Brayfield. I didn't think that the podcast would take us in this direction. We were talking about greyhound and short track oval during this podcast. At least you got something new out of me on this one.
Well, after you called Americans forthright, we had to alienate them by talking about greyhounds, but it's fine. No, I'm joking. So look, your dad, you mentioned that he was sort of like really wanted to be a racing driver, had a day job, let's say. So like, how did you, as kind of a young guy that, perhaps really interested in motorsport, how did you make that leap from there to getting into the automotive sort of marketing world?
Yeah, well, very quickly I realised I didn't have any talent behind the wheel. My brother did have talent, but didn't have the money to do anything with it, which probably was one of the the dots that I collected as I went through life that ended up helping me make some decisions and giving me some ideas. But yeah, I never thought I could get into professional motorsport, or certainly not Formula One. And there was a glass ceiling. Didn't even cross my mind that I could be in professional motorsport when I was going through the education and the sort of decision to what job I was going to do first. So yeah, the film that we're skirting around talking about depicts a scene where the actor's talking about people not caring about their cars, and the fact that he worked in the finance department that was collecting money off of people that didn't want their cars anymore. And that's sort of true. So I came out of university, no idea what I wanted to do apart from work in automotive. And the first job that came up that was local to me was literally collecting money off of people that defaulted on their car loans over the phone. So that's where I started, and basically ground my way, sort of pleaded, pushed, worked hard, got into the office earlier than anyone, left later than anyone else, through various very dull operations, sales, franchising, finance jobs. And actually, I was at Renault and Nissan for 20 years, and it wasn't only until the last 3 years that I had motorsport in my job title. So all of the other stuff I did was off the back of trying to have a career within a big automotive company. So yeah, quite an unusual background for someone that ended up doing predominantly motorsport activities.
I mean, it does sound like you basically fought for, no, I mean, not in a combative way, but really pushed for where you've ended up. And we'll talk about GT Academy in a bit and all the fantastic success you've had. But so let's say you're in Renault, then you went to Nissan, and like, I'm
gonna jump in and correct you. I was very combative.
I was trying to be nice, but yeah, fair enough. Sometimes,
I certainly didn't make many friends when I was at work, because to make progress, and this isn't just about motorsport, it's about all the other jobs I did. As I say, motorsport for a number of years was part-time for me, and it was trying to not even get into that space, but just convince my management, the executives, that motorsport was a good way of communicating, because that was where I was coming from. I was, in my heart, a marketeer. And, that saying, progress is only down to the unreasonable man. I was the unreasonable man, which meant I had to be competitive. And that's not a way to create a career in a very conservative industry, which the automotive industry is, and certainly not in a very conservative company, having a Japanese culture like Nissan. So yeah, I was very competitive, and now I'm not so much, although I'm sure people that work with me now probably say I am. I'm significantly calmer than I was 20, 25 years ago.
There's someone listening to this show that says, wow, if this is you calm, Darren, like I hate to think what it was like in 2010.
Yes, yeah. Sorry to all my previous colleagues for all that went before.
How did you persuade those executives you're talking about?
Well, I guess that brings us on to GT Academy. I was working not as a waitress in the cocktail bar, but I was working at Nissan, which was supposed to be a short-term gig. I was at Renault. I was actually, if you know much about the automotive structure of the industry, Renault and Nissan have got an alliance, so they're not the same company, but there's a cross-shareholding, all that boring stuff. And neither side really, certainly not at a country level, wanted to work with the other. But I didn't speak French, and I wanted to move into marketing. And at that time, if you were working at Renault and you wanted to be in marketing, you had to speak French, which I didn't. So I convinced my then boss that I should go and work in marketing at Nissan for a short period. So I was literally on a loan, which was supposed to be for 2 years. And then I'd come back and basically be the head of sales for Renault UK, even at the young age I was. So yeah, I made the jump across to Nissan. We did all these sort of sliding door moments. We had this special edition 350Z, which came out. It was supposed to be called the 35th anniversary edition, which it was everywhere else in the world apart from one country because of me. So we did a deal with PlayStation and called it the GT4 after the new game, which was Gran Turismo 4. We did a marketing activity. So I was in my element, coming up with stupid ideas. Let's do this limited edition car. Let's give one away to Gran Turismo 4 gamers. So we had this event at a place called Bedford Autodrome, which isn't an oval. Like most circuits in the UK, old World War II airfield in the Midlands. And to cut a very long story short, we had gamers that weren't the fastest gamers. They were just average gamers. We didn't have online facilities back then on Gran Turismo. And we invited 20 or 30 gamers, and they drove all sorts of cars. And at the end, they drove the 350Z. And during the day, they'd been on the Gran Turismo game. And one of the instructors said the immortal words, a couple of these lads can actually pedal, which in translation means a couple of the drivers can drive fast. So I went and checked the times on the game, and I went and checked the times in the real car, and the guys that were at the top, and it was all guys, by the way, the guys that were at the top were the same on both. And that was the moment of inspiration. And ever since then, at least 100 people have told me they had the same idea, but the next 3 years were the perspiration that allowed the inspiration to happen. So I came up with that idea in 2005, and then we launched, and I changed jobs twice in the meantime. We launched the program in 2008, which is the start of what was then called GT Academy. But the working title was Race Idol, which at the time there was a very popular TV show called Pop Idol. So obviously we were never going to call it that, but that was the working title, and it ended up being called GT Academy, which has now got quite a lot of notoriety around it.
Of like live research, okay, and just going, okay, I'm going to need to know a bit about GT Academy. I clicked on it, and it goes, created by Darren Cox, and you've got your own Wikipedia page. So I hadn't realized that in the film, it says that the character, played by Orlando Bloom, is based on yourself. So like, before we dive back into that kind of coming up with an idea that feels very 2024 in 2005. Like, do you get a little bit of say in like which actor's going to play you? Like, yeah, I think Orlando Bloom is the guy. You know, how did that come about?
I asked for Jack Black to play me, and others have suggested that the David Brent-esque Ricky Gervais might have been a good one as well. But no choice at all. I signed a life rights agreement, which basically you sign your life away to the extent that they changed my name, for example, in the movie. They changed, some of the facts. And the funny thing is that I was getting these messages from the executive producers saying, "Oh, we're just talking to this actor who may play you, and we're talking to that actor." And of course, I was telling my wife, "Oh, such and such might play me," like some proper big names. She's like, "No, they're not. No, they're not. No, they're not." And of course, the last one is, "Oh, Orlando Bloom's going to play me." Apparently, Orlando Bloom's not playing you. I mean, look at all the other ones that they suggested. None of those came off. And of course, 2 weeks later, Orlando Bloom was announced playing me in the movie. So very, very strange. And it ruins that favourite dinner party question, which is if you had a movie about your life, who would play you? And I can now, unfortunately, bore everyone for the rest of the dinner party.
Yeah, you've got to do that thing where you pretend not to want to talk about it sufficiently that then people believe you. But yeah,
But this goes back to back to my experience in Miami, where
yeah.
I actually got into the nightclub that Lando was celebrating his first F1 victory by saying to the bouncer, "Hi, my name's Darren. Orlando Bloom played me in a movie," and he let me in. So it works in the right environment, but in the polite society that I live in, where I'm not sure too many people in my village quite know what I do. If I use that as a calling card at the pub on a Friday night, I think I'd be told where to go.
Yeah, there are those subtle or not so subtle differences in culture. I mean, looking at seamlessly looking at the trajectory of GT Academy, it blew up pretty quickly. And, it's one of those things you talked about, that the phrase you said, something like progress comes down to an unreasonable man or something like that. Like I suddenly thought of someone like Steve Jobs and, like the creation of the iPhone and how, now we think of these things as, well, of course we have this, but it took vision to do it. So like, how much were you along for the ride of GT Academy? Were you sort of part of it for many years, or did it sort of blow up and you go on to other things? How did that go?
Well, I think that the proof of the pudding is I left Nissan in 2015, and the last edition of GT Academy was 2016. And it takes you a year to get one ready and out the door, right? So it was my project basically. And once you leave, when the unreasonable man leaves, other people go back to normality, which is accepting that budgets shouldn't necessarily be spent in that way. And it's one person's sort of project, which is very, very unusual in a big company. And I had some amazing backers to help me through. But it was a fight every year. And, if anyone listening works in a big company, they know, firstly, to get anything that's outside of the norm approved and off the ground is massively difficult. But it's also just as difficult to keep it going. And we were very lucky in the fact that it worked fantastically well in year one. It was supposed to be one and done. We were supposed to do it once just to prove the point and then not do it again. And what the way we got it signed off, and we had to go to Carlos Ghosn, who's now obviously famous for escaping Japan in a musical instrument box, which is another great film that needs to be made. There's been a couple of documentaries, but we literally had to get it signed off by Mr. Ghosn. I don't have to call him Mr. Ghosn anymore. Carlos, big G, Mr. G. So it was right up to the board that we had to get this thing signed off. And the basis that we got it signed off on effectively is what's now known as branded content or advertiser-funded programming. It was that we proved that if we made a TV show, it would be cheaper and more efficient than advertising the cars in TV ads, which now is all the thing, right? Product placement, branded funded content, all that sort of stuff that's happening. But this was 2008 that we got that signed off. And remember, we were in the middle of a financial crisis as well. So, all the things that could have gone wrong did, but it went through, and then it just gained this amazing amount of momentum. And the momentum it got actually was from the region. So I was working in Europe at the time, and everyone saw the success we had. And in the end, we had basically every major country ran the program in some form, apart from China, because they didn't sell PlayStations in China at the time. I don't know if they do now. But, we had editions. Yes, of course, we had one in America, and of course, we had one across Europe. Of course, we had one in the Middle East. But one of the proudest things I would say is that we started to democratize motorsport in some countries that didn't have any infrastructure for motorsport. So India, the Philippines, Malaysia, had their own editions, where, again, not many people had PlayStation. So we held events at colleges, universities, in shopping malls, where people come along and try on the simulators and try and qualify for GT Academy. So yeah, that's one of the untold stories, is the globalization of it, and it became a franchise. And I think in the last season we had 120 TV channels take the TV show, which is a global franchise basically. So yeah, the story gets told around the success it had on track. Podiums at Le Mans, winning GT races overall. The Bathurst 12 Hours we won. For example, we won the Blancpain Pro Championship in Europe in 2015, etc., etc. But actually, some of the biggest wins were taking motorsport and online gaming. It wasn't called sim racing back then. It certainly wasn't called esports, to a massive audience outside of North America and Northern Europe.
I was going to use the F word, franchise, and you used it for me. And I guess the other F word is fairness. So, motorsport isn't something you exactly associate with like access and, talent on its own rising to the top. And I'm just recalling what you said at the beginning of the show about, your dad really wanting to get into motorsport and your brother being really talented, but not necessarily having the backing. Like, was that something that inspired you a bit, or like helped you really dig in when you were trying to push this idea, the opportunity for people who based on merit could get to the top?
Not consciously, but it must have done subconsciously. And yeah, I mean, I'm hyper aware of it now, and I guess I was then, but that wasn't there were 10 things that made me want to do this. But the main thing was really simple, because most ideas Fernando Alonso says it best. He was asked after his second world championship by a journalist, what's it like to be the best racing driver in the world? And he said, I'm not the best racing driver in the world. There's a guy driving a bus in Mexico who he just doesn't know it yet. And basically we were trying to find the Mexican bus driver, right, that had that talent. There's very, very few people. So as you say, access is reduced massively in motorsport. There are very, very few people that get the opportunity to prove whether they've got talent or not. And this was just a way of democratizing it. And I knew that we'd find good racing drivers. What I didn't realize, and I don't think anyone did, and if they did, they're lying. We didn't know we'd find great racing drivers, and we did. And one of the things that is a regret is that we couldn't take younger gamers, because I think we would have found someone maybe that we could have got further up the ladder in single seaters, and probably that I didn't push Jan Mardenborough, who's the sort of hero of the movie, and for me the best of the drivers, the one that got the furthest. There'll be a debate amongst all of us that worked on the program who was the best driver. He did one race in GP2, which is now called F2. One race is in Formula 3, one race is in GP3, which is now Formula 3. His last single-seater race, he was on pole position in Japan, and a bloke called Pierre Gasly was qualified third. So, there's still that. We got someone that had never sat in a racing car before our program, and we could have got them to Formula 1. But could we have done? There's still ifs and buts and sliding doors, as I mentioned earlier. So I'm proud of what we did, but I always go back and think, well, what else could we have done? So yeah, it was a consideration about the inaccessibility. Of course it was, but it was more about talent identification than settling a score that people haven't got enough money to go racing. It became that it absolutely became that. And we did improve diversity massively, as I mentioned. We had winners from Asia, and we had winners from the Middle East, where 10 years ago there wasn't these mechanisms to enable them to come through the ranks of karting and other things. So it was just one of many inputs, right? I mean, I remember my formative years. I'd go on I lived outside London, get the train up into London, go to a place called the Trocadero, put my 50p's, as it was back then, in the arcade machine called Daytona, and I was a gamer, right?
Yeah.
So I sort of understood the space, and obviously played lots of Gran Turismo and games even before that as well. So yeah, the accessibility piece was just one of many inputs into the idea and the drive to try and make it work.
And I can
I
see
thought at the end of the day,
No, go on.
it was just a bloody good idea. And
Yeah.
as a marketing guy in my heart, I knew it would deliver fantastic marketing for Nissan, which was my job basically.
Yeah, well, I mean, I hope you were rewarded for it. I mean, I can see that Jan was portrayed in the film as well. So just on that subject, and a bit of a basic question, but like, the film production happened. Did you get access to the set? Did you get a special screening? Like, how closely did you get involved with that?
Amazingly, there was 5 script writers over the course of, I have to add up how long it was. I think it was nearly 10 years that I was told that the film was being made. Of course, I didn't believe them, that there was going to be a film made about our project. I still didn't really believe it until they started filming it. So we were reasonably heavily involved through till the last script. So the second last script was written by the chap that did American Sniper. He came here, he came to my house, met family, he met Jan's family. We took him around Silverstone, showed him where the camp was, met all the personalities, the team boss, the mechanics. He did a lot of research. This is pre-COVID, and he wrote, I think, very good script. Of course, there's some politics in it. Sony were funding the program. Nissan weren't really involved. I was no longer at Nissan. I wasn't involved with Sony, obviously. So they made sure, if you've seen the film, that the Kazunori Yamamuchi, who's the maker of and head of the studio and founder of Gran Turismo, Polyphony Digital is the studios, was basically some godlike character, which he is sort of to a lot of people that play Gran Turismo. So yeah, I mean, that script was great, and then they brought in at the last minute the script writer that did King Richard, which was the Williams sisters and Richard Williams's story, to, as they say, tidy it up. And he literally didn't speak a word to Jan or I, and his research was Google based, I think. So Jan was very involved in the production of the film. He was basically his own stunt driver, which is a very cool sort of meta thing, isn't it? That, there was a guy playing him, but he was playing the guy that was playing him in the car. And yeah, I went to the set. Obviously wasn't involved by that point once the production started, Hollywoods, and met all the cast. Orlando and I and Jan went out for drinks in Budapest and dinner, and had a couple of days in Budapest with the guys, but I wasn't adding any value. I was, they'd done a great job in terms of the sort of look and feel of the thing, and the director had a very clear vision of what he wanted to do. It's not the movie I would have made. There's bits of it that I think they're really good in terms of the way it's shot, the way it's cinematography is laid out, but it's not my train set, right? So yeah, I went to, if you remember, it was last year was the actors' strike, so they didn't have an official premiere. They had lots of sort of smaller screenings. So I went to the first one, which was in Barcelona, and then Sony very kindly hosted one in London for us, so just for friends and family of mine. So we had 2 screens and a bit of a do. So we had our own sort of private screening for close friends and family. So Yeah, I hadn't seen the movie until I went to Barcelona, so I wasn't really involved. And you know what? There's things I could pick apart. There's storylines that weren't true. There's things that my character does that I absolutely wouldn't have done. That people say, well, that guy's way too corporate. And of course, there's a private jet that I fly around on in the movie, and I just remember it being a lot more easy jet than private jet. So, but at the end of the day, someone's made a movie about a thing I did, and famous actors portrayed me in the movie, so I can't really complain. And it's enabled me in many ways to do something which we don't do enough of, which is pause and celebrate success. Because I never did when we were doing it, right? I didn't realize what we were doing and the impact we had, because I had a load of other things on, whether I was in my normal full-time job or by the time I transferred to motorsport, I was racing or running racing programs all around the world. So I didn't appreciate what we'd done culturally, if you like, to motorsport. And again, if you've seen the movie, there's a end frame which says something like Team Nissan changed the world of motorsport forever. I'll take that as my epitaph. So yeah, it's been a nice way to sort of sit back and reflect and reconnect with people that I was involved with at that time. Remember the people that didn't support us, and forgive them for their sins. So yeah, it's been a great 9 months to sort of reflect on the movie and look back at an amazing period of time in my career and a number of other people's careers as well.
Yeah, sort of forgive them by not sort of constantly pointing out the error of their judgment. Exactly. I mean, yeah, you'll take that. Team Nissan changed the world of motorsport forever. A quick question that's sort of a bit of a tangent, but you'll see it's related. We ask our guests something we call the hot lap challenge. So you can pick any car on any track. What would you pick?
Am I driving?
Or you can be driven if you want to pick a driver as well, but up to you.
Oh right, yeah, no, okay, yeah, didn't really understand the question that well. Did I say so on track? Oh, excuse me. Well, you said off on a tangent. I'm going to go on a massive tangent.
Go on.
Oh, I don't know now. Oh, that's too different. So the natural reaction is, well, I don't know, drive a Formula One car, but again, this is going back to my roots. There's a rallycross car. And there's a guy called Martin Shanker, who is it's not a swear word. Absolute lunatic. He did rallycross in the 80s and 90s, and he drove an Escort, basically, crazy 1,000 horsepower 4-wheel drive Escort. I'd love to have a go in that, or a Metro 6R4, which again was in rallycross. So again, I was brought up, these days in the UK, certainly outside of America, it feels like there's only one motorsport, which is Formula One. When I was growing up, I grew up on a mix of rallycross, Le Mans, touring cars, a bit of Formula One, short track ovals. So I've got a whole diverse sort of background of doing that. So I've been very lucky. I once drove a Formula One car very slowly, a Magny Core. If you Google me, you'll see that I shouldn't really be fitting in a Formula One car. Even back then, I didn't. But yeah, I just love that era of these crazy high performance, normal street cars that have been modded, as the Americans would say, into these rallycross missiles. 0 to 60 in under 2 seconds. So it'd be that. Yeah, I'd go back to the British Rallycross Grand Prix at Brands Hatch and drive a Metro 6R4 or Martin Shanker's Escort. That's a left field answer.
No, I like it. We need those unique creative answers. So I looked up the Metro 6R4, and I think, in the 90s, I would have called that a mini Metro, but obviously you've pimped it out. I don't know what the word is. And definitely in the UK, there was a culture for hot hatches, which I probably grew up just at the tail end of. You'd have like the Williams Renault Clio, for example, and other bits and pieces. Yeah, fascinating.
Yeah. Or the other thing, drive a Nissan GTR GT3 at the Silverstone Classic. There we go. That's an achievable aim one day in life, right? That still could happen. So yeah, I could go on with that. You could I could go on with that. The answer for that, I could do a top 50 if you like.
Well, you're kind of iterating the answer. You kind of go, oh, wait, what about this? What about this? Before we talk a bit about when you left Nissan and sort of, it looks like you went out on your own. I'm really interested to understand kind of the leap of faith you took there. We're talking about you racing. So you talked about the 2016 Silverstone 24 that you won. Like, so were you racing on the side through all this period? Is it something that happened you got back into? Like, how did that happen?
Yeah. I raced a little bit when I was younger. Again, very badly in rallycross. So that was my sort of chosen sport. It was the cheapest one I thought that I could compete in, and then obviously career and family come along, and then I started to race sort of towards the back end of my career at Nissan, but they didn't like me doing that. I was an executive, and there was some nonsense about insurance and whatever. So I actually changed my name. I raced under a pseudonym. So if you actually search 2016 Silverstone winners, there's a driver called Richard Roberts, which is actually me. And the reason I called myself Richard Roberts was after one of the most famous drivers of all time from Talladega Nights, Ricky Bobby. So yeah, I was Ricky Bobby, or Richard Roberts was my pseudonym. And I remember a very famous endurance commentator called John Heinhoff said, "You're going to regret that in the future. The fact your name's not down as the winner of the Silverstone 24 hours." I was like, it gives me another story. I can tell everyone that the reason I had to change my name was because Nissan didn't want me to race. So yeah, I did a bit of racing. And then, up until 2 years ago, I went back to racing classic minis, which was, where my dad was racing. So, there's been a bit of revival in classic racing in, the UK and America. And I went back. Me and my brother started racing minis again, which was fantastic fun.
Really interesting about the I mean, look, I'm unoriginal. I just Wikipedia things, but what's really interesting is that in the 2016 year, it has the names listed, but Richard Roberts is in inverted commas. So I like, but it doesn't link to you. It doesn't link to anything. But it's just funny that they're like
Oh, there we
Richard
go.
Roberts.
Oh,
Yeah,
there we go. Yeah. In
yeah,
inverted commas.
yeah.
Yes, very
I love
funny.
it. And the year before, one of the winners was Jamie Chadwick, and no one ever heard of her again. I mean, no, she went on to massive things. So yeah, it's
Well,
not.
if you look at the class win, the prototype class win, I didn't realise Jamie was in that race. The prototype class win was me again, 2015, in a Radical works car. So yeah, I think she probably was in a GT4, and we just had prototype problems, and I won't say radical problems. I will say radical problems.
Yeah, you said it.
So yeah, but that was great fun as well. It rained most of the time. I remember driving down the Hangar Straight, aquaplaning in this little Radical, and there was these GT4 cars going past, and I can imagine them with the traction control on, with the ABS on, with probably heated seats and the radio on as well. And I was struggling to keep this thing straight, going down the Hangar Straight. So yeah, one of my stupider moments of trying to do a night stint in a Radical at Silverstone with candles as headlights.
As you do. I mean, yeah. So this Richard Roberts is not in inverted commas, but he is in bold, which must signify the class win. But there we are. Very interesting. I mean, so look, it was around that time, actually, just before that, because late 2015 or so, that you left Nissan. So was that like you taking a punt on yourself? Was that you kind of going on to do something different? Like what caused you to make that jump? And have you got advice to our listeners on kind of moving on from a successful sort of situation?
Well, how long is this podcast? Because I've got an hour on that one, if you like. I mean, you could say midlife crisis. I shouldn't joke really, but yeah, I changed a lot that year, generally in my life. But the trigger was we had a very innovative, which is the third innovative project we had at Le Mans, which was an LMP1 car, which basically we had probably 20% of the budget of Audi to go and try and win Le Mans. And again, because of the momentum I had with GT Academy and other things I'd done, I'd convinced the senior executives at Nissan, like the board, that we could build something that was completely radical for Le Mans. And basically, we went against everything that racing car design had been telling everyone since the 60s, since John Cooper put an engine in the back of the car. We decided we were going to have the engine in the front of the car. And there's all sorts of engineering reasons behind that, but basically the rules allowed you to have a lot of aero freedom on the front of the car, which meant if you could get the weight at the front of the car, you could utilize aerodynamics. And that car basically was rushed, obviously under budget. I made some mistakes. The designer made some mistakes. The engineering team made some mistakes. And yeah, it fell on its arse basically. And on the Monday after Le Mans, I wrote I sent a 10-point plan into the motorsport management group. I knew 8 of those things they wouldn't agree to. One of them was put me solely in charge, because as usual in a big company, there was a committee and we weren't getting things done fast enough. I knew that wasn't going to happen. And those, the decision very quickly came back saying, no, that wasn't going to happen. So I resigned. And because of, as I discussed previously, various executives who told me not to go and do the motorsport job, then spent the summer trying to keep me, to go and basically do what I was supposed to go and do, which was run Nissan Europe in some capacity with that sales and marketing, whatever. I had a career before I went into the motorsport job. My previous boss to that said, this job's going to be your worst career decision ever. He was probably right, but it was great fun. And so it took until October. We then went and won the Blancpain championship at the Nürburgring with gamers in the car. And we beat works teams of Bentley, I think were up there at the time, and Audi. And that was a Sunday. I had a very, very good Sunday night, and resigned properly on the Monday. Said, you can't keep me, I'm off. And went and did my own thing. So it was a mixture of things, but one of them was, we had this massive project. It could have been a massive success, and I saw that the big company culture wasn't going to allow us to change enough to make that innovative project successful. So I backed myself. And for many years I was called the entrepreneur in residence at Nissan, and it was a good thing for a while. And then there was a management change, slowly happened. Lots of senior management left. My air cover had gone, and then rather than it being the entrepreneur in residence, it was the entrepreneur in residence. That tone was good enough to explain that it wasn't a good thing at the end. So I decided I'd just try and be an entrepreneur. So went off and started a couple of companies, and have done lots of crazy shit since, basically.
Yeah, and one of the things that I spotted, because listeners might be like, okay, you're nearing the end of the episode, well done. It's like, but then you founded the Race Media, which I think pretty much every listener that we have will have heard of. So, you said you founded a few companies. What was it that you were getting up to? And on the Race Media, how did you kind of know that what you were going to do was just going to strike the right tone at that moment and blow up?
All the good decisions seem really simple in retrospect, don't they? I mean, basically, Autosport in the UK, Racer in the US, are legacy brands, right? They've got magazines. That's what their business models are based around. And then they tried to switch into digital. This was a fresh blank sheet of paper with the best people. My co-founder of the race, Andrew van der Berg, was the longest serving Autosport editor, and had been there forever, but was an innovator and was trying to change and couldn't change that business. So we were at a Nissan event in Fuji, and he tells a story. I've heard him on podcasts talking about it. We sat on 2 upturned beer crates at about 4 o'clock in the morning, after a disastrous WEC round at Fuji when it was rained off, and basically came up with this plan to have a content first, digital first media brand, and it morphed into the race. So that was that was one of the things I did, which was a brilliant journey. We built that from nothing, and of course, other podcasts I've been on have asked what's the thing that you've, which are business podcasts rather than racing podcasts, talking about innovation. And of course you could talk about GT Academy and using gaming as a marketing tool and, blah, blah, blah. But what was amazing, and again, something I look back at, we were launching the race as a brand. So the race media is bigger than just the race, the brand. There's WTF1, driver database, my old consulting companies, etc. in there. But we were launching the race as a brand in February 2020, with the first big race being March 2020. Now, unless everyone's wiped their brains, which we tried to do about that period, our first race, which we were all geared up to, we believe we had the best journalists, we had, the best back office, we had the best, ideas for podcasts and content, and we had bought a YouTube channel with a bunch of subscribers already on it, so we were ready to ramp. I think we had 4 journalists in the paddock in Australia, which is unheard of. We've spent a lot of money on transport. We had, I think, 3 or 4 sort of management went down there with them as well, hosted all the Formula One teams, the last dinner that all the Formula One teams had together, PRs had together. And then on the Thursday, it was this, I got a phone call from Andrew van der Berg saying, this race ain't happening because of this thing called COVID, which we didn't really know much about at that time, of course. So, we had sunk a lot of money and effort into this, shareholders, investors, people's changing job, leaving very secure jobs to come and join this new merry band of pirates. And almost instantaneously, I said, look, we're gonna have to do something. Let's put a race on. And with my background in gaming, we ended up basically working sort of 2 nights and through the night around the world, gathering all the people we knew, and we put on a virtual race on the Sunday and did subsequently for another 16 weeks, all the way through lockdown. So Formula One had their thing, which a number of different organizations worked on. We had ours, which was completely independent. And we ended up basically producing a live TV show for ESPN every Sunday afternoon for 3 hours, which is just insane. Out of basically this office I'm sat in now, which is, if I tried, I could probably fit 10 people in it, but I was here on my own, and, we had people scattered around the world producing this, what became a TV show. So we couldn't have planned a better launch of a media brand than that. But we also could have gone under if we hadn't have pivoted in that 3 days.
I was going to ask you about the impact of COVID, but existential.
I had a great COVID. I was co-producing a TV show for the biggest sports channel in the world. So yeah, and absolutely horrendous. It had massive impact, on health of friends of mine, and I lost very, very good friends. One of the guys I'd like to name check, guy called Ricardo de Villa, who's one of my, he was an engineer. If you Wikipedia him, he's just got this amazing career designing Emerson Fittipaldi's Formula One cars, and all the way to being basically the character that was the engineer and sort of team manager in the film. We lost him during COVID and everything else, but personally and professionally, it gave us this massive boost. Sim racing, which had been pretty hidden apart from GT Academy up to that point, and it was just starting to kick in. I was running the Mercedes F1 esports team. We were running the Racing Point F1 esports team, and it was pretty big. But then it just got completely supercharged by COVID. But and by the way, we could do another episode on the impact of sim racing of COVID, because in the end, I think it's had a negative impact overall net. It's in the doldrums now, and part of that is the boost it had in COVID. But for us as a business, we managed it. We couldn't have managed it any better. We launched a brand off the back of what could have sunk us, basically, by just being innovative, fast of thought, well connected, gathering a team together, getting our heads down, and coming up with this thing which ended up being called the All Stars series. And I didn't when I was doing stuff for Nissan. I didn't really collect much memorabilia or trophies. Everyone else kept the trophies. I didn't really. A couple of ones I kept. The Bathurst one I got a copy of, and a few other bits. But obviously, I've got the Silverstone 24-hour trophy here as pride of place. But on my wall, which you can't see because we're just doing audio, is two things. One is a sort of grid of the cars that I was involved in at Le Mans, and the second one is a bunch of model cars that were the cars of the Legends Trophy. And in the Legends Trophy, it still amazes me that we had everyone from Sebastian Vettel, Max Verstappen. I know he didn't do the Masters, so Sebastian Vettel, all the way up to, in terms of age, Mario Andretti, with Fernando, Jensen, Emerson Fittipaldi, Dario Franchitti, randoms like Jason Plato and Tom Coronel and Tony Kanaan and Helio Castro Neves, all right. Kevin's dad, Jan Magnussen, just absolute Darren Turner, legends like that were racing online. Jacques Villeneuve, who, if this comes out soon, has just said some very harsh things about Daniel Ricciardo at the Canadian Grand Prix, playing on his controller. So, I still pinch myself to think that we brought sim racing to the forefront by having those guys racing, as well as top gamers, top pro drivers. But this Legends Trophy was just, an amazing thing to behold. That you had, when could you ever have Sebastian Vettel and Fernando Alonso racing against Emerson Fittipaldi and Mario Andretti? Unbelievable. So yeah, that was that's one of the things I'm most proud of basically saving a company before it was launched by being innovative and disruptive.
Yeah, and that's fascinating. We've had Mario on the show actually before, and I'm intrigued to imagine him, in a sim rig, evidently not on his controller like Jacques Villeneuve. Which was the kind of legend driver that you were most surprised kind of took to sim racing? Perhaps you hadn't expected that to be the case.
We launched World's Fastest Gamer, which was my sort of remake of GT Academy, which was different but the same. It wasn't just based on Gran Turismo. It was everything from mobile gamers could enter all the way up to R Factor gamers. And we launched that. We partnered with McLaren. I think it was one of the first deals that Zach signed off when he got there. And we launched that. And Jensen was part of the launch. And he came into the launch. We had all these journalists at the McLaren Technical Centre. He'd just been on the sim, actually. It was when Fernando was doing the 500 and Jensen was subbing for him at Monaco. But Jensen's done by this point, right? He's sort of ticking a box and having another great day out, a weekend out at Monaco with his mates in the car. And we launched this thing called World's Fastest Gamer, which is to prove that simulators are really important to real world drivers. And basically, he came on stage and said, I've just been in the sim. I put it in the marina a couple of times. I just don't understand. And this whole gaming thing's, I'm a bit too old for it. But literally, he's an official McLaren driver on an official McLaren program, belittling what we're doing. But it got some interesting headlines, and we were very happy that Zach was back to what we were doing. If you go back and look at some pictures of the Indy 500 that year, Fernando's car had World's Fastest Gamer on the side of it and on the nose. That was in the days before Zach started, signing every single company under the sun to be on the side of the McLarens in various racing series. So we were good, right? We had an amazing support from McLaren and Zach and everything, but Jensen was not particularly supportive. And then during COVID, it was him and Fernando that were the most engaged, right? They were taking chunks out of each other and spending so much time setting the cars up to try and beat each other for this Legends race. And then subsequently, Jensen set his own sim team up. So that was the most surprising. After seeing his attitude towards sim driving and gaming, when we were doing World's Fastest Gamer, to literally launching his own sim racing team. So that was the most surprising. But what was the most surprising thing was the amount of effort and focus that Fernando put in. I mean, it's just incredible. I can see why the guy is like he is in Formula One, because he would literally grind like 8 hours a day doing setups. I mean, just insane, absolutely insane. The amount of commitment and focus and professionalism. And we went on to run his, it was his or our team, anyway, a joint team for Le Mans 24-hour virtual that year. Might have been the following year. Anyway, and the guy was just absolutely brilliant. I mean, Rubens Barrichello was part of his team, and he had a couple of other sim drivers that I think we sourced for him. But Fernando was doing all the development work. I mean, it was just incredible. So yeah, from that moment, I became a Fernando Alonso fan. I must admit, he was insane. And then, you know, the team that we put behind it. And again, you know, what people don't see is that sort of event. We had engineers, we had a team manager, you know, we had all sorts of things going on, and he sent them all, you know, a care package. You know, he sent them his latest hat and the glasses from his brand and the T-shirt and all that, just to thank them for doing what they were doing. So, yeah, the commitment you could see by someone like that, you think, no wonder that guy is that guy, because he does it even when it doesn't really matter.
But that's a fascinating sort of bonus story you've given us there, and the care packages thing. You know, it makes me wonder whether I've got Fernando wrong all these years, because I do remember that there was this kind of conspiracy that he was giving kind of brown envelopes, not in a bribe way, as a gift to Lewis's mechanics back in the when they were teammates. And I always thought, that was him trying to kind of get them on side. But maybe he's just a nice guy as well as a competitive one. So, you know.
Well, let's loop back to how we started this. I don't think he was a nice guy. I think he's, you know, grown into himself, much the same as maybe I have. I don't need to be Mr. Angry anymore, and maybe he doesn't. And again, I've you know, encountered him a few times when he's been at Aston Martin, and he seems to be a big team player to me. So yeah, maybe either we got him wrong at the beginning, or he's sort of you know, relaxed and chilled into it. But going back to the point, it doesn't mean he's any less competitive.
No, and it's okay to be different. You know, a different character to when you were sort of early 20s compared to where he is now. I'm just looking, it was the 2017 Indy 500. I was hoping it wasn't the one where he basically struggled to qualify. But yeah, it was the one where he led laps. You've got the world's fastest racer on the side of the car, on the side pod, you know, almost title sponsor. Amazing.
Yeah, another one to tell my grandkids about.
For sure. Well, look, as we bring the episode to a close, I've got one like kind of question we ask all guests. We'll leave that to the end. But before that, any final message you want to leave to the listeners, and also where can people find you if they kind of want to hear from you and follow your story?
I used to be Mr. Angry on Twitter, so I've probably got the biggest following there. I've started to, you know, post a few bits on Instagram, but it's not very interesting, really. It's normally, you know, sunsets and stuff. I normally post on LinkedIn. Find me on LinkedIn. I tell some stories there. One of my favorite posts I did recently was about the history of simulation in aviation and motorsport, and the first flight simulator actually was designed by the French in 1917, sort of around the First World War, to try and help pilots, and it's literally just sort of a balance board almost of trying to, you know, work out how to keep something up straight that obviously didn't want to keep up the right way. So yeah, that sort of stuff, you know, random things. When I did a talk for an airline and started to research that, you know, link between aviation and motorsport that we know, and then suddenly went down a rabbit hole of how simulation has been in the aero industry. And that was one of the dots I collected when I was racing back in the day. One of the guys I was racing against, Dad, was a Concorde pilot, and he was telling me about, you know, simulation in aviation. And then you look back, 1974, the Concorde simulator was commissioned. So Formula One was way behind aviation. You know, the first Formula One team was McLaren to have a simulator program. And it wasn't until Montoya was at McLaren, I was talking to someone about this the other day, that they actually started taking notice of what was happening in the simulator rather than it being a distraction. So, if you think people were being trained to fly supersonic airlines in 1976, I think that came online. It wasn't until 2004, 5 that Formula One teams actually started to use it. And now I think one of the most interesting stories, if you like technology and you like Formula One, is to research into how what's now called the digital twin process is used in Formula One. Basically, there's a third car over the weekend back at the factories. The guy that won that world's fastest gamer, McLaren, a guy called Rudy Van Buren, is now the Max Verstappen says he's his best teammate. It's not difficult to be his best teammate at the moment, is it? Who basically sets the car up for him, works with him remotely at the factory to try and improve the car virtually while the Red Bull team are away at the track. So that's a really interesting side. That's the sort of stuff you'll see on my LinkedIn. So yeah, go and find me there.
Absolutely fascinating. And the story you said just about 1917 sort of first flight simulator, it's almost like you're rehearsing for an art tour. So if you're not doing that already, I don't know, it'd be interesting. You know what I mean? Like, it's a sort of anecdote that you build out, but yeah.
Yeah, if I had a beer in my hand, it would be even better, wouldn't it?
Yeah, well, there's always that. So, look, it's been fascinating to hear from you, Darren, and I'm sure that there's sort of 3 episodes worth of stories we haven't touched on, and you're welcome anytime. But before we close this episode, we've got a really vital question, and I'll set it up by asking quite an obvious one, but I'm sure the answer will be yes. But Darren, do you enjoy the occasional pizza?
Yes.
Okay, see, this feels like it's a trick. It's not, but here's the real question, right? Yes or no, pineapple on pizza?
No, absolutely not.
I like that. The tone. You were asking earlier, is the tone right to get across the message? That tone was disgust, I think.
I'm a look at the heritage, right? What do the Italians think about pineapple on pizza? I went to the I think it's the only Michelin-starred pizza restaurant in Italy or something, and it's an absolutely amazing place. You can only buy 2 different pizzas there: one with cheese, one without cheese. No, 3 different types of pizza: one with cheese, one without cheese, and one half and half. And you can only buy 1 type of beer and 1 type of wine, and that's it. And it's about €7 a pizza. It's in Napoli. And I would recommend anyone go there. And I'm pretty sure if you ask them for some pineapple pizza, they would introduce you to local mafioso very, very quickly. So I'm with the Italians on that.
I love that. And Mario Andretti sincerely agreed with you. So we have that straight from the horse's mouth. Well, look, Darren, thank you so much for your time. It's been really fascinating. Guys, if you've made it this far into the episode, because I really should have said this earlier.
Congratulations. Congratulations on making it all this way.
Well, we'll clip this up. There's too much here. So, look, been real fascinating. Guys, give us a thumbs up wherever you are, 5-star review, or come to us on social media. We're at Strip the Dip on all platforms that you can imagine. Let us know what you're thinking. Let us know what you thought of this episode, and give us some ideas for future guests. Because Georgie, if she can get Darren Cox, who could we get next? So anyway, that's it from me. We'll have another guest.
She got Mario Andretti.
Yeah, I mean, oh my God, you should see the names.
It's only downhill. It's downhill from there.
I don't know. I'm trying to work out, has Mario Andretti had a film made about him? I'm sure he's been in one. I'm trying to work out if he's had it made about him.
There's not many people that when you talk about after dinner speaking, right? I mean, that's an I'm actually going to I don't want to do that, boom, always just drop. What's he just dropped there?
No,
I'm going to LA next week to do a conference, and literally the person's written in the biog for the conference. Not many businessmen have had a movie made about them, and then list out the people that have, which includes Jordan Belfort in The Wolf of Wall Street. So hopefully I'm not as notorious as he is. But yeah, come on, Mario, where's your film?
Yeah, well, I'm sure it'll be coming soon. But I'd like to just remind the listeners that, Darren hasn't served any prison time and, could still practice financial trading if he so wished. No, brilliant. Look, guys, thank you very much for listening. This has been F1 Blag. Until next time, good night.